What is up, Generals? We are back with Ultimate General Civil War. And this is the Union Major General playthrough. Fiasco jumping back into the Army screen after the Battle of Nansemond. We've cleaned up some of the losses after the fight. The Confederate Army stands at about 73,000, give or take, and so we're getting ready for eventually the Battle of Chancellorsville. If I jumped into the fight right now, we'd be looking at the Union's 64,000 versus the Confederates. 67,000 versus the Confederates, 76 and change. We would outgun them. Weirdly, however, we would have significantly more brigades than they would, which makes me worry about the size of their units, but that is what it is. We've configured Second Corps to take part in the Siege of Suffolk. And I think briefly jumping into this fight here, I think I was a little hard on myself after Nansemond. And, the attack on the firebase really fell apart really quickly. And so the takeaway for me is that I need to get some real brain power put behind an effective methodology for an attack. And there has been some commentary in the comment sections on my videos about some of the best practice. And so, I'm going to really work on, I think, putting some mind power into that. So there's that. As far as the state of the Army is concerned as well, I'm playing catch up, I feel, financially. So the thought process going into this fight is, I need a win. I need a pretty clean one, and I need to do so in a very economic fashion. Additionally, the opening portion here really only involves holding territory, and I can trust 1-star units to do that, and then lean on my 2-star vets to do the more heavy fighting later on in the fight when the rest of the corps shows up. So we're building our force here, and I'm thinking, what do I need to do, and what are the takeaways from Nansemond? And the thought process in my mind was, one of the big things is that I ran into the issue when I was watching the Nansemond video in post-production. I had too many. I thought watching the video myself, I had too much infantry and not enough artillery. I was running into some situations where more riflemen weren't actually doing me any good. And one of the things that I could have been bringing to the fight against that fire base would, instead of having more guys to just get canistered, would have been having more cannon to slowly, or maybe not slowly, but to just disassemble some of their batteries. So some of the economics of the overarching meta campaign are going into my thought process in terms of what I bring here. I hope that I can trust 1-star units to handle the defensive portion of this battle, and I'm actually really happy with how they perform. So you have Parker's Guards kind of taking a central position with the intention of being kind of the focal point of the rest of the unit. I've got 33rd Infantry kind of posted up on the left here in a position so that they can kind of get some crossways fire. And then I've got a battery of James guns and a battery of a brigade. I've got a artillery collection of James guns and then some 24s. The fight portion of this video is at 2 times speed. The before and after screens are going to be at 1x speed. Not that we have a lot of time in those screens. So what I'm doing now is I'm trusting essentially the initial defenders to sort of hold their posts, especially I can't read the name now, unfortunately, but this guy out here by the observation point near General Peck. Baylor? It's a B word. And there's Terry, and there's this guy down here. I can't read his name, so I apologize. My concern is having that observation post for as long as I can hold it lets me put the Pyrrhic unit that exists when the game starts, put the Pyrrhic unit on Confederate artillery as early as possible. And I'm getting a good recon on they've got at least 2 batteries that I can see, three batteries that I can see, and I know I'm being fired at by at least another 4th. And they're all in the 360 man range. So given my batteries at 350 are 14 gun batteries, that means to my mind that their batteries are probably 15 guns, which are big, heavy batteries. And later on when I get onto the offensive, they hurt too. So in terms of defenses right now, the concern is, what's the most immediate threat, and or where's the most efficacious use of my cannons. So Blake's battery is exclusively being used on counter battery for the time being because I'm not feeling terribly threatened on my left. Later on, I do reallocate the Pyrrhic guns to defense support. Here in the middle, I realize that the 24-pounders are out of position, and I swap Parker and the 24-pounders. What this allows me to do is that where all these Confederates are clumping up, trying to cross the river in this otherwise open terrain, the Pyrrhics are now situated where they can they can shell units in the river or just barely on the beachhead. And so what this ultimately means is the positioning of the 24 also allows them to shell this unit hiding in the forest, Anderson. And it's an excellent position for that 24-pounder. They can really kind of just bully that portion of the battlefield. And frankly, as a result, I think of the 24-pounders, the southern echelon of my line is never really seriously threatened. The 24-pounders are able to just almost by themselves hold any serious offensive effort to the south off. And the major Confederate attack, when it gets off in the north as a direct result of, I'm thinking, flanking fire on Terry's position that forces him back and then leaves Balmer or Barber, maybe. It looks like it could be Barber. It leaves this guy by the observation point, it leaves him just kind of stranded. And so Foster. Okay, cool. Now I got it. We're good. Now I've read it. It's leaving Foster just kind of stranded. And as you can see, he's just getting hammered from just about every side. But because Peck is nearby, his morale is holding. Now, eventually they're going to charge, and I'll have to fall back. But all that does is that when... Well, we'll get that. I'm getting out of myself. All that does is that it allows the 24-pounder essentially to get kind of enfilade fire on attacking Confederate infantry, which is just almost even better. So Foster's holding out like a champ. The defensive troops really do a wonderful job here. And I'm just ecstatic with the performance of my units in this particular fight as well. They fight off a significantly larger than their number Confederate contingent, and these are 1-star units. Some of them have 55s. I don't think I have any Lorenzes in the army anymore, but maybe I do. I don't know. So here's that charge, like I was mentioning. The initial thought process is to have 28 and Parker providing enough supporting fire that maybe I can throw it back. I'm banking on basically the melee buff that being in trenches gets you, but Corse to the north there is able to put in kind of his own flanking fire, and Foster just completely folds. So I panic a little bit and then sort of reassemble my defensive position. I retreat Foster. I'm being charged in the middle, so I move the skirmishers from, I think, 33 or 32 infantry to provide that rear fire. I know skirmishers aren't going to be enough to by themselves break it, but I'm also not terribly concerned. It's a single brigade of infantry charging in the south, so I'm not that worried about the south down there. And they're fine. Murphy with supporting fire from 31st Infantry is able to send them back down into the woods. The James guns, I think, provided some supporting fire, and the 24-pounders were still able to just absolutely bully this whole position up there. So they're really earning their paycheck by a huge margin. And so then just Parker's Guards and 28th Infantry fall back into this relatively thick block of woods. The Confederates still have to attack uphill, and there's open ground. And what's even better about that position is they don't have any cover. So they're just standing out in the open, just taking whatever I have to give them. Blake, now that I don't have line of sight to the cannon in the backfield, is in a infantry support position now, or role. And in fairness, this is not the Pyrrhic gun's best use. The Pyrrhic gun is better used in the shelling or solid shot range band rather than in the canister range band, but it is what it is, and canister is still not terrible. I realize now that 28th Infantry is in a really bad place when it comes to their attack, so I rush Terry in for flanking fire, and then I have 33 basically that if they attack my position, 33rd will be able to provide support fire from the rear. What ultimately ends up happening is course routes and then routes into 28th's position, and I'm like, what the hell? So this is a bit gamey, but what I do here is I detach skirmishers, which then sort of resets the positioning of the unit, and then reattach those skirmishers, and we have 28th back where it's supposed to be. It's a bit gamey, but I also don't know if I really think that I don't know. I don't think that them routing into my unit and then dragging us into a disastrous melee across the field is going to be a thing either. And frankly, we're on Major General. I need to do a little bit of gamey stuff every now and again to make this work. So here we're seeing the power of the 24. Armistead, it looks like on my screen, maybe. Arneson, maybe. The cavalry, Garfield, Garrett, something like that. They're all just right there in front of that 24-pounder unit. They're just getting hammered. And so this is, I think, where almost falling back is preferable in this position, because it's from an artillerist's perspective, that's just a great place to have those cannons. There's just not really a better better angle for them to really get work in. But the 24-pounders just do some serious work. We're 2 in-game hours into this fight, and they're already at 700 kills. And that's only going to get, they're going to triple that figure before it's over, I'm sure. So that goes well. I briefly debate reoccupying the trenches and ultimately decide against it, because they're in a position now where offensive maneuvers by me are going to require some careful consideration. I realize that I've left my far left undefended, and they have free reign to walk across this creek bed here, which is a mistake. Troops in water take so much more damage than they would normally take that I can't pass up the opportunity to fire on course in the river. And so Terry eats it, which is unfortunate on the way over, but the 33rd has a chance to redeploy and pour fire into him. So Terry takes another volley. And there's a second brigade backing up course, which is nerve-wracking. So Terry's at that kind of I'm on the wavering edge of I'm not sure. So he's putting out fire, but it's not really effective. The 33rd is, however, pouring effective fire into course, and then Kemper behind him ends up but routing Kemper. It's really touch and go right now. I'm very nervous about the phase of the battle. And it's it's why I'm playing it in slow-mo. It's partially why I'm 2-timesing the speed, because there's a significant portion of this fight that I play in slow-mo, and I don't think it makes good YouTube for people to watch me play a game in slow motion. So anytime that I use a lot of slow-mo, I end up just kind of deciding to do post-production video. This is very frustrating, this bit here. This cav unit, it's this weird cav bug, I think, that where like we don't know where it's supposed to be, so it goes through me, and I'm getting rear flanked by 33rd the entire time, or 33rd's getting rear flanked the entire time, and it's just I think his name is Baker. I can't read it right, but So fortunately, at the same time as this happens, my reinforcements come in, and so I'm less worried about a rogue unit of cavalry just teleporting through my army, because there's, the remainder of a corps now all of a sudden to kind of defend my backfield. So I'm not so worried about it. And I'm able to get, 33rd back online, dumping fire into Corse, who's in that creek bed. And it gives Terry a chance to kind of collect himself and then get back in the fight. I'm not a big fan of leaving wavering troops like that online, but so we wipe the cav unit, and I needed to keep basically Terry in position because I was that concerned about them getting past my flank on the far left. It ends up being fine. The 33rd is able to provide enough support fire that Peck and Terry are able to rally themselves and get back into it. I'm trying to figure out how to select 41st Infantry, which is like they're on the map, but they're not, and I can't click them, and they're not showing up in any of the bar on the bottom of the page. So there's 2 corps, 1st div, 2nd div, and 3rd div. I can't select 41st Infantry. I'm kind of weirded out by it. So at this point in time, I'm feeling pretty good. The offensive has, for the most part, stalled from the purposes of the Confederates, and I'm not worried about them getting into my position. We have a line of fire on Longstreet. I don't think we get them right now. We do get them eventually, but I don't think Terry's the one to do it. But we certainly weaken them. And yeah, I just generally at this point in time, like I couldn't be happier with the performance of these rookies, basically. Like, they've been a little bit seasoned, but they're basically rookies. Parker is just killing it. The 24 pounders are rocking it. At this point, I feel fine pulling Terry back into the trench works. Terry from that position can actually shoot into the creek. So I feel like that's a good anchor to my left. And with him being in place, I now start beginning to contemplate offensive operations. So how am I going to flank these cannons and get at them? So clearly charging into the offensive or the attacking Confederate troops is not the right answer. And the thought process goes like, well, okay, essentially Battle Drill 1 Alpha is the thought process. Is I've fixed the enemy to my front with all of the elements you're currently seeing. Now, how can I destabilize their position? I could grind it out and attack them on the angle they're currently attacking me, and probably win that fight. You take a look at the way that the red bar has slowly shrunk relative to the blue bar, probably could win that fight, but I think it'd be messy. And instead, the thought process is like, well, if they're attacking me here, what are they doing on the bottom of the map, my right? Because they're really heavily invested in this assault on the Union left. So the top of the map, they've got I can see something to the effect of 10 units maybe. In it's 2 deep but 5 wide is my perception of their attack. And so I'm thinking like, okay, well, can I force a crossing to the south over the creek bed and then push into that open terrain to the south? And there's this beautiful like fortress of trees that I'm kind of eyeballing moving into as the basis of my operations. And I think maybe I can shatter course here. So I move 27 up and put some fire into course. And like the idea is that all I'm doing in terms of my front line is just not letting them attack. Everything moving to the south on the screen now is what's going to go into that attack. And it's an even mix of, well, it's most of my guards. I've got, I think, 3 or 4 guard brigades. I've got the 4th Light Infantry, and then I've got, I want to say 3 more brigades of green-ish troops. So 1 stars, but I think 41st is actually is no stars. I would imagine they pick it up. We'll find out, I suppose. Honestly, I don't remember, and I played this, earlier tonight, so you would imagine I should remember, but no, I don't. So yeah, there's not a lot to talk about as far as what's going on the north part of the map. We're just holding our ground, and they're just ramming themselves into us. But now it's really touch and go in terms of what we're going to accomplish coming out of these woods and transitioning from a tempo perspective into offensive operations. And the way that I'm right now experimenting with attacking Confederate artillery is a swarm of skirmishers. Because my experience at Nansemond shows me that moving offensively in the direction of Confederate artillery as formed heavy line infantry is just begging to get shattered. And so the only thing I can think of is loose order infantry or open order infantry hitting the Confederates because their increased cover and the fact that open order infantry just takes less damage from cannons in the first place. And that really, if the detached skirmishers of, say, 9th Infantry shatter, it's not the end of the world. All of these things, in terms of offsetting the risk of that attack, this is the best I can come up with for the time being, is with as many cannon units as I know the Confederates have brought, which I imagine, I think the number is like 6 different artillery units, which is crazy. Attacking it with heavy infantry is not the correct answer. And so using skirmishers to force cannon to withdrawal. Like, I'm not concerned about shattering units right now. I just want them to be not shooting. So that one unit that withdrawed off to the north of the screen, Colt, he's at 40% morale or something. So I'm not worried about him anymore. Now that I've got him in the point where I can keep that tempo going, now my job is to try and get the other 3, Shoemaker and Shoot? I don't know, whoever. The 3 artillery units I'm engaging to the south of the screen right now is making sure that I keep all of them in a morale weakened position. Now 41 gets out of position here. They get flanked by the 3 or 4 other batteries that make up the Confederate, kind of like, we'll call it their headquarters, back where the observation post is, essentially. They're providing enough enfilade fire that makes this assault precarious, and it's why I'm leaning way heavily on my skirmishers here rather than engaging with my formed line infantry, because they're just going to get chewed up to pieces. And so as far as methodology is concerned, this whole maneuver here is a bit of an experiment, but it ends up kind of working. Although now that I'm watching it, I should be following these skirmishers more closely with infantry. This is also a mistake. So I charge the cannons here with my skirmishers, thinking like, oh, there's 3 units, charging one of them. That should go in my favor, and I imagine it would. But what it does is it exposes me to direct fire from Mason, who has been as yet untouched and is therefore in a position to fire. Meanwhile, in the north of the screen, in the east of the screen, I have kept Colt consistently wavering, or routing actually, with 2 separate skirmishers. So I've got an example of what's working, and I've got an example of what's not. I'm tweaking the line back at Suffolk to make sure that guys are in the best possible cover and all that kind of thing. And I'm just working on getting as many angles as possible on these cannons. And again, I'm just not worried anymore about what's happening to my front. The main Confederate attack at this point is a sideshow to now the offensive right hook when we wipe out one of the units of cannons, which is fantastic, because this is why I should be following the skirmishers with the line infantry. The skirmishers can diffuse the impact of the attack, but when it comes time to kill stuff, they just don't have the volume of attacks to significantly harm these units. But then you get 4th Infantry online, and it shatters one cannon unit, it shatters another in no time, and it significantly weakens Mason. But at the same time, look at the rate of damage they're taking. These are, well, they get canistered. Okay, that sucks. Like, that's very unfortunate, obviously. But they're being shelled by off-screen artillery, and they're just getting, reamed to do it. So once again, I need to have a screen of skirmishers out in front, and I don't. So there's an example of stuff that's working, and there's an example of stuff that's not. The maneuvers to the north of the screen, to the east of the screen with 42nd and 9th Infantry working in tandem, that's working beautifully. I had skirmishers out front. They engage. They fix the enemy, and then 40 and 42 and 9 killed it. I folded the skirmishers back into the parent unit, and then I occupied cover. So we have some examples of stuff working, and we have some examples of things I need to tweak. But generally, we're, I think, leaning into a better methodology than what I've been using so far. Terry's still kicking ass in his position in the far corner. I'm starting to ID Confederate artillery, and now I'm starting to try and pour parrot fire into it. So I'm still trying to waver these units, because I know that I can't approach formed artillery, but if I can pin them, basically if I can pin the machine gun nest, I can approach it. That's the way that I'm kind of thinking about it right now, is if I can see it from long enough away and I can put enough fire on it that I could put them in the 40% morale range, then I can move in with the heavy infantry and I can destroy it. But then I realize there's more batteries still. There's like 5 batteries of artillery over here or something. It's wild. So I get one of them, and you see it working. I get one of them pinned. I sweep in with 42nd down the cover, and I realize, my God, there's more. So we do it again. We pin another one, and we sweep it. And I'm seeing that there's the momentum here of the possibility of me being able to, wipe these units. There's a lot of really good stuff that I'm doing on the screen here, and there's improvements that can be made, but generally speaking, I think we're onto a winning formula, where you screen with skirmishers, which is exactly what I imagined them to be for, and then once you pin the artillery, you very aggressively sweep down and go for the killing blow. So we're closing on the end of the fight portion of this battle. From a macro perspective, this was the win that I was looking for. I was feeling pretty down about myself after Nansemond. I was like, I don't know, am I up to the late game? Because I think it's a very different fight in the later portion of the campaign than against the early Confederate army when you're playing essentially the Napoleonic Wars with smoothbore guns. They've really upgraded. Like, we've entered a new phase of the war. I said it towards the end of the video, and I mean it. We've entered a new phase of the war, and I need to be learning essentially all over again how to fight this enemy, because the tactics that I used at, say, Shiloh or Second Manassas are not going to be usable here. So Siege of Suffolk was definitely the win that I was looking for. Here's the post-battle screen. Before you take into account medicine, 2,800 in change. With the artillery, we're looking at just over 3,000, or no, just under 3,000 casualties. But let's take a look. So we're going to filter by union, and we're going to filter by losses. 1,400 of those 3,000 casualties were suffered in Allied units. And then the remainder are essentially a trickle amongst all the other infantry, and a lot of it was in 1-star units that I can replace with a lot less cost than I can anybody else. Notice all the units that are named there, none of them are guards. We get promotions in the officer corps. I still don't know who Alfredo Lawton is. I'd imagine he's probably a division commander. I'm not sure. But let's take a look at some of the... so rescued is whatever. I got some guns back. Okay, fine, whatever. Captured. So the Confederates are using Tyler Texas's, are using CS Richmond's. Their artillery department is 3-inch ordnances and Pyrrhic guns. That is a huge signifier that the Confederate artillery has really, really elevated itself to the next level, so to speak. So we pick up some money, we pick up some reinforcements in terms of manpower, which is going to be vital. I'm going to blow pretty much all of it, getting the Army up to fighting strength for Chancellorsville. In terms of finances, the Army's not doing great. So I need to play very cagily at Chancellorsville. Frustratingly, all of those casualties inflicted don't seem to have any impact on the Confederate numbers. They're back up to, actually, they've got more numbers than they used to have. So they were at, 73. Now they're at an average of 75. We're going to take a look at what's coming up before I do anything with the numbers in the Army. Union Army is hanging out still around 66,000. Confederates are around 67,000. But before you take into account scaling and everything else, I would imagine those numbers to look pretty close to what's going to happen going into Chancellorsville. Anyway, we're coming up at the end of the video. This is Fiasco. I hope you learned something. I know I had a great time. I will see you in the next vid. This is Fiasco, signing out.